All right, welcome to Mr. Joyrider Gaming. It's your boy Jared, and we are going to do another ranking today. This time, we're going to rank every game that was distributed by Coleco for the Atari 2600, and a little bit later on down the line, we're going to do a flip of that, of Atari versus Coleco for these games. But these are the games that Coleco, these are the ones that came in the off-white carts for the Atari 2600, and I tell you, a good bunch of games, so we're going to rank them right here on Mr. Joyrider Gaming. Coming up. Yeah, so today we're going to take a look at games that were published, not necessarily developed by, but published by Coleco. Now, Coleco, as you know, they had their own home console, the ColecoVision, that sported absolutely better graphics than the Atari 2600, an arguably worse controller. And here's what we're going to do. All the games that are available on ColecoVision and published by Coleco for Atari, we're going to do a separate video for the ColecoVision games, kind of a mirror of this one. The developers for these games varies, and they're extraordinary. You've got Sega, Coleco, of course, Nintendo, Universal, Konami, and more. And as you know, so these are some of the biggest names in gaming of all time, and they were developing games this early. And all these games kind of date between 1982 and 1984, and Coleco withdrew from the game market in 1985. All right, we're going to dive right in. First, we're going to start off with this Berenstain Bears game. Now, this game, I wasn't able to play it. Supposedly, according to Atari Age, you can play it with full audio on the Z26 emulator. I haven't gotten it to work, but maybe for a future video. So I'm just going to rank it right now as if you stumbled upon the cartridge, you owned this cart, could you play it or not? Well, you couldn't, because it was unplayable without the KidVid controller and 3 accompanying audio tapes. Atari Age says the game takes cues from the tape when to advance. The KidVid controller came with the game Smurf Saves Today, and this was the only other game. And we're going to have to give this one an X, and an X means I couldn't play it. So if F means broken and unplayable, X means it wasn't possible. Here's a little bit of the audio with the still frame from the game.
The next thing Brother Bear has to do is catch the number known as 2. So many important things we use make a habit of coming in 2s. Ears and earmuffs come in 2s. Hands and feet, gloves and shoes. Twins and mittens, butterfly wings, bicycle wheels, and other things.
Next up, we've got Cabbage Patch Kids Adventures in the Park. Now, this is a game that it's a prototype game, so I don't know if it's completely finished or not, but you're able to play it. Atari Age calls it a long-lost prototype, thanks to discovery by Alex Handy at a flea market in California. All right, let's take a look. Here's my thing with the Cabbage Patch Kids game. It's not a bad game. It's really not. I would say it's like Smurf on steroids. You're jumping across pits, you're jumping over meatballs. Everything always looks like a meatball. It's got an interesting skyline. You've got the trampoline portions of the game. It's not a bad game. It's just not that much fun. These games, like Smurf and Cabbage Patch Kids, they are meant for little kids. And so as little kids, maybe they would enjoy the game more than I did. So I'm going to give Cabbage Patch a C. It's a prototype, okay, maybe it deserves more points, but it looks good, it plays fine, it's just not that much fun. All right, 1982, and you're working as a developer for Sega, and you make this game, Carnival, which was also, again, released on the ColecoVision. I gotta tell you, it seems simple. You're gonna look at it, you're gonna say, this is another Space Invaders, or this is another Mega Mania type game, and it is, but there's enough kind of cool mechanics in this game that the fact that it is kind of derivative doesn't make it bad. I'll tell you, the ColecoVision version of this game is killer. The graphics look great. You can tell what everything is. But after playing this for Atari 2600 for a little while, I like it. I was playing it last night when not even recording it, just on my own. You've got 3 rows of characters. The ducks, they flop down at you. You've got call them the pipes up top, and you got to shoot kind of the end off the pipes. On the top left-hand side, there's your bonuses, which can either be more bullets, less bullets, more money or less money, or more points or less points. Floating past is these little things that say 8 on them. Those will give you extra bullets. So you need to kind of keep an eye on all of that. When you defeat enough of the enemies, or in the right order or whatever, then the next level starts. It just gets harder and harder and harder. But it's a game that is super fun. It's super fun. So I will rank Carnival, and I'm going to probably give it for both the systems of this. It gets an S. It's a fantastically fun game, and like I said, I'm going to keep on playing this one. I have fond memories of when my cousin had a ColecoVision. I was playing this game, forgotten all about it, 30 years later, whatever, and I'm happy to give it an S. It's Carnival, and it's by Sega, it's by Coleco for the Atari 2600, and it's an S. All right, time to move on to probably one, if not the most famous, one of the most famous games of all time. This was Nintendo's Donkey Kong. This came out in 1982 for the Atari 2600. I know this game does not look great. My first comment. As far as just very, very stripped down ports go, this game is actually very fun to play, and it plays really good. I've seen people say that Coleco purposefully put out kind of an inferior version so it would make ColecoVision look better, and that's possible, probably probable, because it is such a big difference. And we already know, by 1982, they could have done better than this on the Atari 2600. Have you ever seen the game Battlezone? That was 1982 or 3. That's a game that looks 30 miles ahead of Donkey Kong. That being said, as far as Donkey Kong home console ports go, it's a fun game. It works. It only has 2 of the 4 levels, so that's not so much fun. But it's all we had at the time, and I can still put that one in and play it and have a good time. I can't say the same for all the other Donkey Kong ports. There's just some kind of nostalgic about it. So for nostalgia's sake, I'll give it a B. If it's your first time playing Donkey Kong, you might like it more than if you're a Donkey Kong aficionado. So that's Nintendo's Donkey Kong, imaginative software for Coleco for the Atari 2600. That gets a B, a solid B. All right, so you got Donkey Kong, you got to have the sequel, Donkey Kong Jr., 1983, Atari 2600 by Coleco. This is, again, as you know, a Nintendo property, but I'll tell you, the 2600 version plays pretty good. For what it is, I'd say, no, there's multiple levels. Once you get the hang of sort of how Donkey Kong Jr. moves around, it's always been more fun than the original Donkey Kong. It's a very good stripped down version of the game. Donkey Kong Jr., it's a great Atari game. Is it a great game otherwise? A great arcade game? A great Nintendo game? I don't know. But I know it's a great Atari game. So Donkey Kong Jr. is another game on this list that gets an S, superior. It's Donkey Kong Jr. and it's superior. It's an S. All right, next we got 1984 by Taito, a game called Frontline. Also, it was available on Coleco, MSX, MSX2. It was another arcade port. It is a game that just, it tries really hard, and it's almost there. If it had been just a little more polished, I think I would have had a better time with it. There's 2 different styles of gameplay. You can either play as the infantryman or whatever, and you could play as the tank. There's some graphical glitches that go on. I noticed when you get in the tank, if there's a character on the screen, he'll turn sort of into a tank, but not really, and he'll go shoot down the bottom of the screen very quickly. There's definite issues with how the character moves and how he shoots. He's hard to control. Tank's hard to control as well. It's all one-hit kill stuff. So it's almost like a Commando, which I'm a big fan of, but it's like a less polished Commando that just wasn't quite there. Although, I will say this, I enjoyed playing it. My only issue is the polish. My issue is the polish, and all the other Coleco games are all pretty polished, pretty well done. This game, not necessarily the case with this game. It's Frontline. It is very hard to get anywhere in this game. So I give this game, if I'm ranking it against the other games that Coleco published for the Atari 2600, I gave Frontline a C. You can play it. It's not a miserable experience like a D, but it's just average. It's a C. It tried so hard. All right, this one is a really good find. This is Looping, and it was made by Coleco. This game never came out. This was a prototype that we're looking at right now, so it's not even sort of listed. There's not that much information on it. Atari Age said that it's an unreleased prototype based on the 1981 Ventureline arcade game of the same name. It's unknown why the game was never released, but it appears to be complete, and it would have been one of the better titles released by Coleco for the 2600. It's fairly close to the ColecoVision version of the game in terms of gameplay, but it is a difficult game, it is, of which maybe that's a reason for why it was not released. Okay, so let me just start with the ColecoVision game. I have like vague memories of being a 4-year-old and seeing this game as a game on the ColecoVision. Maybe there's a little bit of that kind of inner nostalgia that's factoring in my critique of this game. Just two different styles of gameplay. There's the first, and on my playthrough, it took me forever to even figure out there was a second. They say you're supposed to destroy the terminal, and once you figure out how to do that, by shooting sort of the walls of the terminal, which is different than the Coleco game, you got to shoot the missile thing. Once you do that, then it opens up a gate to the next level. And the next level, it is a maze. And since your craft is very difficult to control, and it's very hard to control, that maze isn't working. It works really well on the Coleco version. On the Atari 2600 version, not so much. But I feel like it's the kind of thing that you probably could get the hang of. I gotta agree with Atari Age that this is a game that, had it been released, it would have been one of the better games made by Coleco. So I'm gonna give it a B, but I give it a B only because the difficulty is so ramped up that it's pretty frustrating. You keep playing through trying to get to the next part, but that maze, I don't know, man. It's just very, very difficult. And I hate to give a hard game that's still fun, but not easy. I hate to give that a lower rating, but it gets a B. I think it's pretty good for a unreleased prototype for the Atari 2600. This game gets a B. Check it out if you haven't. It's fun. Okay, let's take a look at Mousetrap. Mousetrap was, this is a game that I would say is sort of synonymous with ColecoVision. It's a Pac-Man clone, it is, with a little bit of different style gameplay. When you get the bones, which, as opposed to the power pellets, you can turn into a dog, and the dog can then eat the cats. There's also these little gates which you can open and close. And there's one of the Pac-Man games has that. Is that Super Pac-Man or Junior Pac-Man? It's sort of like that, whichever version of Pac-Man has that. But it's tedious. It's very tedious. The screen doesn't change. The gameplay doesn't change. I started my playthrough, and it lasted 40 minutes. And, 40 minutes of just not a lot of fun. I know you could probably change difficulty settings and make it more difficult, make it more challenging. But honestly, if I wanted to play Pac-Man, I'd play Pac-Man. It plays slightly better than Pac-Man on the Atari 2600, and I would say it plays better than Mousetrap on the ColecoVision. But at the same time, again, it's just the same repetitive gameplay. It works fine, it looks fine, but you gotta believe by 1982. People were getting sick of seeing the same game just with a different paint job on it, and that's what I would say this game is. So I give Mousetrap a C. You can play it, you can play through it, but you're probably not going to put it as amongst one of your favorites. It's fine. It's a C. It's average. All right, next up we got Mr. Do. It's basically Dig Dug with a few different sort of mechanics. This was 1983. This was an arcade game, certainly, and it was published by Coleco. It's a Universal property and released on the Atari 2600. So I always viewed Mr. Do as the superior version of Dig Dug. I love Dig Dug. I play Dig Dug quite a bit still to this day, and it's a fun game. But Mr. Do is cool. You've got a bullet that shoots sort of in a zigzag pattern. You've got the pumpkins that you can drop on people's heads, but if it goes down one and it doesn't smash into somebody, it doesn't break, and you can push them, which is very cool. Something that I couldn't quite get the hang of in this playthrough, but you can push them and squish the bad guys. You got to get all the cherries and the fruits in the round. There's also something that goes on. Well, the characters turn evil, even more evil. So there's something that causes that when you go in the middle of the game board. I could probably look it up on the manual, but, you know. And you can spell out the word extra. It's super fun. It's a game that I think is probably superior to Dig Dug. It's harder than Dig Dug, I would say. And this is another one that looked great in the arcade, looked great on the ColecoVision, was released on the Super Nintendo, Game Boy, Commodore 64, the Atari 8-bit had a version of it, and the Apple II is the arcade as well. So it's Mr. Do, and it's a game that I think is a lot of fun and one of the best of the bunch as well. You know, I know there's some low ratings on some of these games, but some of them are getting really high ratings. This one gets an A. It's great. It's fun, and it's Mr. Do. If you have never tried it before, you gotta give yourself a date with Mr. Do. It's Mr. Do by Coleco. It's an A. Alright, this is another game that I had a vague recollection of, that I wouldn't have remembered it had I not just started playing it on this list of games. I was familiar with the name of it, but I guess I had played this game quite a bit for ColecoVision when I was younger. This is the Atari 2600 version of Roc'N Rope, and it was released 1984 by Coleco, and there's a lot going on here. It's a platformer where you take your rope and you've got to climb to these other levels. You do have a sort of a weapon. It's a flashlight. You can blind the monster so you can get all the way up to the bird up top. And the levels change if you can figure out how to beat each one. It's not as pretty as the ColecoVision version, but it's a lot of fun to play through, and there's not really anything else on the Atari 2600 that has this style of gameplay. I mean, there's games that are similar. Donkey Kong would be one, and I don't know, maybe even Spider-Man, but this is just well polished, well put together, and it's a lot of fun to play through. It's Roc'N Rope. Roc'N Rope gets an S. Why is it getting an S? Because I couldn't stop playing it. Honestly, that's why. I could not stop playing it, and I think that must mean something for the game. It must be a game that's fun. It's hard enough, but it's not too hard, and so it gets an S. Roc'N Rope, how about it? Alright, 1982 brings us to Smurf Rescue in Gargamel's Castle by Coleco, and I'm very, very well acquainted with this game. Had this game, I still have it for the Atari 2600, and I've probably played it a million times. Here's how this game sort of works. The first level, especially if you start on the easy setting, like most games, it trains you on what you're supposed to do. But by the time you get to like the fourth level, everything's moving so fast, it's almost impossible to get anything done. There's just not much happening. The ColecoVision version has beautiful graphics, by the way. and some extra levels of gameplay. It has what it has. Look, there's multiple screens. They all look different. The music changes for the spider's lair, the cavern. It is very well polished. The jump mechanic is terrible. You gotta pull up to jump, and you pull up, and then you do it again for him to jump sideways, or if you don't, you won't jump high enough, and you'll die. If you are a little tiny bit off on where the jump is supposed to be, which you can't control when you're in the air, you'll die. And it's tedious, and although it's got good music, the song is called Simple Gifts. It's an old folk song. Actually, it's an old shaker song. A lot of people, I guess, don't know that that's where the song came from. The song for the Smurf game is actually a song called Simple Gifts. Well, the Shakers wrote it. That was a group, like a religious group, kind of like the Amish in a way. WMC Fish Club did a good version of that song, by the way, on their anthology CD, the best of the WMC Fish Club. We released that record. Let's see. I'm going to have to give this a C. It looks good. It's just not fun. It's boring. It's boring and unfun. It's a C. Okay, there's also a prototype that exists of Smurf, which is a lot different than the version that was released. The jumps, they're much more difficult. You have much smaller areas where you can land on. I'm not really sure what everything's supposed to be. There's a ladder, which it doesn't do anything. Maybe it's supposed to. There's a mushroom, which maybe it does something, but I don't know. The end level is the same in Gargamel's Castle. But it's really neat. It's neat to play through. If you're like me and you've played Smurf a million times, check it out, because it's obviously the same game with just different levels. So I'm going to give this one a ranking as well. If I gave the actual game a C, I'm going to give the prototype a C as well, just because of the coolness of it, if you want to check it out. It's Smurf Rescue in Gargamel's Castle, the prototype. It's 1982 by Coleco. Okay, so here we have another KidVid game. This is the game you need the KidVid controller, and it used audio tapes. It's called Smurfs Save the Day, 1983 by Coleco. I guess there are ways to play it online, but I couldn't figure it out. Maybe I'll work on it later. But yeah, this is what you get, and it's another one that has an audio tape. I'll play a little bit of clip of the audio tape at the end. This one, I can't rank it. I give it an X because I couldn't play it. X means I cannot play it. Here's a little bit of what you would have heard back in 1983 if you had bought this game.
Day and it's time for fun, so come along with me. A musical vacation with your good friend Harmony. But you'll have to help me with my song, because as you can see, the notes keep falling on the ground. The glue that holds them can't be found.
Okay, brought you down low with the Smurf that you couldn't play, but I'm going to bring you back up high with Konami's Time Pilot. This was a game that was released in the arcade. There were versions for Coleco. There are other versions as well. It was developed by Konami. You know them well. And it's basically a shooter, but it has this interesting, you're a time traveler. So you start in 1940 and you go through time as you're playing, and you start in 1910. The way they move changes, then you go to 1940 and then 1970, then you end up in the 80s, and finally in 2001. The aircraft, they differ. You've got sort of biplanes in 1910. Then, of course, you got World War II fighters in 1940, as well as a dirigible in the 70s. You've got the helicopters and things. And then in the 80s, you've got the jets. And then in the 2000s, UFOs, just like we all remember back from 2001, whenever we had well, you know what, though? I guess if there are all those reports coming out, maybe. But I'm going to tell you, this game is awesome. It's awesome for the Atari. It plays great. It plays just like the ColecoVision version, the arcade version. It's one of the best games of the lot, and maybe one of the better games for the system altogether. And I'm not even a huge fan of shoot 'em ups or games where you're flying. All right, but this game, I give it an S. It's fantastic. I want another one. I wanted to keep playing and playing and playing and playing and see how far you can get. Usually it's to 2001. Then you get killed by UFOs. It's called Time Pilot by Konami, published by Coleco for the Atari 2600, and it gets another S. That means so far we've had 3 S's for the Coleco games. How about that? Okay, we got another prototype here. It's called Turbo by Sega, and it was based on the Sega arcade game of the same name, but this did not come out for the Atari 2600, even though it looks pretty complete. Now, I played through this game as much as I could, and I put it that way because there is a part later on where everything glitches out and that the game ends. There's nothing you can do. And when that happens, I don't think that's... I should probably give you a warning, too, a trigger warning for your for epilepsy or whatever, because it's just a flashing screen and everything starts flying at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I don't think it's supposed to do that. I'm going to have to give it an X, though, because I couldn't give it a fair shake. Maybe there's a different version that works better or on a different emulator or whatever, but Turbo's going to get an X because I couldn't get it to work. All right, next we've got Venture. And Venture, I guess, it was a well enough known Coleco game that it's on the cover of my Coleco flashback that I have. It's like, now includes Venture, which is unfortunate because this game I hate. I don't know what it is. It's the way the character moves. It's awkward. You bump into the walls so much. It's even worse. I'll tell you the truth. The Atari version is better than the Coleco version because the ColecoVision version, the character can't move diagonal. You got to move up, over, up, over, up, over. It's horrible. It's horrible. Then you got this map screen, but you got to give them credit for having a map screen. But you're just a little dot, and you can die easy, and it's hard to move into the walls. And there's a whole nother level, too, a blue level, a pink and a blue. After the blue, you expect it to keep on going on to yellow and everything else, but it doesn't. It just loops back with it slightly more difficult. So on top of it being irritating to control, even though it's a very well-known game, it's also very repetitive and boring. It's repetitive, boring, and frustrating, and I do not like this game. I've played it 1,000,000 times, had this game growing up. I never really hated it as much as I do now, but look, I'm getting old enough. I'm not going to play games that are bad, and this game's bad. I do not like it. It's called Venture for the Atari 2600, made by Coleco, and this game is going to get a D. A D. It's not so broken you can't play it, but it's... skip it. I would. It's Venture, and it's a D. All right, down to the last one, and this is a game that I'm very familiar with, and I had no idea that there was an Atari 2600 version of this game. It was developed by Sega, released by Coleco for Atari 2600, and it's Zaxxon. It is the game, they call that what do they call that, isometric view, sort of looks 3D-ish, that came out for the ColecoVision, and you'd recognize it instantly if you saw it. If you put on this Atari game next to it, you would not know they are the same game. They're very different. They're very different because the viewpoint where your character is traveling is completely different. But you can go up and you can go down. You go side to side, and that sort of mimics the experience from Zaxxon for ColecoVision. This game, when it came out for ColecoVision, was extremely impressive. We all were rushing to play it because it was like the new big thing. I've never really been good at the ColecoVision version, just, I don't know, something about the depth perception, I just was never any good at it. And so I think it's fun, the ColecoVision version, but it's not a game that I go back to as like, oh, I can't wait to play Zaxxon. But I'm very, very glad that I found the Atari 2600 version that I did not know existed, because this game is, you know, it's bangers, as they say. It's great. It has the same sort of mechanics, the up and the down, but it's not as confusing as the ColecoVision version can be, and it can be confusing. So it's not like going to be an authentic arcade experience, but what they ended up doing, rather than do the arcade version badly, they just kind of reimagined it. So I would call it that, a reimagining of Zaxxon. So you'll see when I put the ColecoVision video together how different they are. I'll do some contrast and compare. But so I had a lot of fun playing this one. I give it an A. It was I was very happy to find it. The best thing about this project I'm doing is coming across games that I've never played before that I would now rank amongst like the best, and that's my favorite. I want to keep going back to them because not that often you get to find hidden gems, you know. All right, it's Zaxxon for the Atari 2600 from Coleco, and it's an A. So where does that leave us, then? It leaves us with Coleco being in pretty good company to make games. There were some that were boring and for kids. There's a few that were average, yeah, and there were a few that were good to great. And as a result, Coleco ranks pretty high as far as I'm concerned. As an average of about a 4.21, and that would put it right in the B to B plus area as far as overall games. Now, that's not counting the X games that I couldn't rank because I couldn't play. So you're talking, I mean, it's a high, it's not a high B, but it's a medium B. It's pretty good for Coleco. And they did a real good job in making memories for a lifetime. They really did. That sounds cheesy, but it's true. All right, well, listen, you wanted me to pick a best game out of all that? Oh, I don't know. The very, very best game out of all those? Time Pilot and Mr. Do and Carnival. They're all great. I don't know. Listen, subscribe, like, share, please. And if you want to get in touch, you can find me online, Jared Morris on Twitter. It's at Jared Morris, jaredmorris.com, Jared Morris Radio on Facebook. All right, until next time, I'll see you when I see you. And as always, I say, good night, good luck, God bless, and good day, sir. I said good day, sir. You stole fizzy lifting drinks?